So he went from Brooklyn to Ephesus with the Testament of Mary, and he proved that there's nowhere that he's unwilling to go. So even his hometown. You have to have a lot of bravery for that. Enniscorthy has featured in a number of his novels, in Nora Webster most notably, and I believe that novel is very close to home in more ways than one. 3 years later, he took us to ancient Greece in House of Names, a high-octane, high-tragedy story told largely through the eyes of Clytemnestra. Then to the imagined perspective of German writer Thomas Mann, just 3 years ago in a book called The Magician, which conveyed with power and pain a man, in my opinion, capable of greatness and of cowardice in equal measure. It won the Rathbones Folio Prize. And that takes us to today, except for the other things that Colm has been doing. Short story collections, 2 of them, Mothers and Sons and The Empty Family, a couple of plays and a poetry collection called Vinegar Hill, and just a few works of non-fiction. I'll run through their titles. This is excluding the edited volumes. Bad Blood, A Walk Along the Irish Border, Homage to Barcelona, The Sign of the Cross, Travels in Catholic Europe, New Ways to Kill Your Mother, Writers and Their Families, Love in a Dark Time, and other explorations of gay lives in literature. A collection of essays called A Guest at the Feast, Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know, the fathers of Wilde, Yeats, and Joyce, and a book about the Irish revival that we just heard Aidan mention, Lady Gregory's Toothbrush, and a collection of essays on Henry James, and a book on Elizabeth Bishop, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award for Criticism. His next work is a work of non-fiction, which comes out in August on James Baldwin. So 2 books in 1 year, just in case you weren't feeling bad enough about yourself. And all the while he's been a professor in the humanities at Columbia University and Fiction Laureate of Ireland, which comes with a huge workload, and contributing editor to the London Review of Books. And he's the sort of person who goes around reading and blurbing young writers' books and inviting them to parties. So to use what I've noticed to be Colm's go-to phrase, in other words, Colm Tóibín wrote a novel called Brooklyn that was quite popular. 15 years on, he's written another, a sequel, Long Island. So my question is, did the success of Brooklyn haunt you such that there was nothing but to get at it with a pumice stone and write afresh on that palimpsest?
No. I mean, I hate sequels, and they're cheap. And if you think about the 19th century, if we'd had sequels to, for example, Pride and Prejudice, it would have been so disillusioning that Mr. Darcy would have turned out not to be rich, or to gamble his money, or to be just tedious. And if you think of Moby Dick, War and Peace, I mean, it just is a really appalling vista. That every time anyone publishes a novel, that the whole point of writing a novel is that the ending has to be enough for the reader, that the aftermath has to remain, I suppose, shadowy and mysterious, but enough there to give the reader something, just something when they put the book down thinking, that's as much as I need to know. Maybe I need to know one more thing, but I realize why I'm not being told. I think the great ending of a novel for me is Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, where, she just says she's gone back to her husband, but we haven't been in her mind, Isabel Archer's mind, for a while. I'm giving the plot away, of course, but it's been in public, it's been published for 140 years, but that idea that you end a book and the ending has to be enough. So I wrote the book in all innocence, and it was almost going to be a short story. It was almost what's called a novella. It just got longer, and then it was published, and then it happened that someone made a film out of it, and that it was good, but the idea that I would go back and tell everyone what I failed to tell them the first time as to what happened next really would be extraordinary. I mean, it would be something. I've written 11 novels, as you say. Imagine if I had to go back to each one I mean, it's bad enough as it is. It's tedious. And so I didn't. And strangely, what's strange, I think, is that no one in publishing ever said to me, "We'd love if you would stop writing books about ancient Greece, Clytemnestra, the Virgin Mary, these Germans. Just go back to what you're good at, which is writing about Enniscorthy and writing. I said, why don't you write a sequel to Brooklyn and shut up, And nobody ever said it, ever. So it was never on anyone's agenda until I got the opening, I suppose what's now is the opening 2.5 pages of this novel in my head as I was walking along the street. And when I got them, I realized immediately what was coming. And we have an Irish writer, John McGahern, who used to say about ideas, if you're a novelist and you get an idea, you say, well, I hope I don't get another one until after Christmas. Because you realize that the next few years are just gone. And so I got this opening, and I thought I could work with that. And it was 25 years between the time of Brooklyn and the time of Long Island. So it wasn't as though I tell you what happened when she came back the first day, the boring business of settling down in marriage, having 2 children, and being happy. Like, that's never been a novel. So luckily, I didn't write that. It didn't occur to me to do that. And then I got this opening, and so that's how the book was written. But I'm not proud of this. I mean, it still remains a cheap business, the idea of a sequel. And as you say, I mean, it's, yeah.
I'll give you that.
Thank you.
We need to hear this cheap business commence, I think. If you just read a snippet from the opening. So it's set in 1976, 2 decades after the events of the previous novel, and Eilish Lacey. Well, I know that both of us called her Eilish, and I heard you say that you started calling her Ailish after the film.
Well, in Enniscorthy, it would be Eilish, but in the north, in Northern Ireland, it would be Ailish. Yeah, well, so it just depends on what part of Ireland you're from.
What do we choose?
Eilish.
Okay, Eilish. And so she's now in her 40s, and she's married to Tony Fiorello, an Italian-American, and she's living in a cul-de-sac amidst all of his family. And I'd love you to read from it, and then maybe you could tell me this. Does a person live in Long Island or on it?
On it. So, well, this is the first page of the book, so it's just a few paragraphs down. When the doorbell rang, Eilish stood up lazily, presuming it was one of Larry's cousins calling for him. However, from the hallway, she made out the silhouette of a grown man through the frosted glass of the door. Until he called out her name, it did not occur to her that this was the man her mother-in-law had mentioned. She opened the door. "Are you Ailish Fiorello?" The accent was Irish, with a trace she thought of Donegal, like a teacher she'd had in school, and also the way the man stood there as though waiting to be challenged reminded her of home. "I am," she said. "I've been looking for you." His tone was almost aggressive. She wondered if Tony, her husband, if Tony's business could owe him some money. "So I hear. You're the wife of the plumber." Since the question sounded rude, she saw no reason to reply. "He's good at his job, your husband. I'd say he's in great demand." The man stopped for a second, looking behind him to check no one was listening. "He fixed everything in our house," he went on, pointing a finger at her. "He even did a bit more than was in the estimate. Indeed, he came back regularly when he knew the woman of the house would be there and I would not. And his plumbing is so good that she's to have a baby in August." He stood back and smiled broadly at her expression of disbelief. "That's right. That's why I'm here. And I can tell you for a fact that I am not the father. And it had nothing to do with me. But I am married to the woman who's having this baby, and if anyone thinks I'm keeping an Italian plumber's brat in my house and have my own children believe it came into the world as decently as they did, they can have another think." He pointed a finger at her again. "So as soon as this little bastard is born, I am transporting it here. If you are not at home, then I will hand it over to that other woman, and if there's no one at all in any of the houses you people own, I'll leave it right here on your doorstep." He walked towards her and lowered his voice. And you can tell your husband from me that if I ever see his face anywhere, I'll come after him with an iron bar that I keep handy. Now, have I made myself clear?
When one of Eilish's initial retaliative thoughts just after this moment is that she might exclude Tony's clothes from the washing, my stomach did a flip. Did you worry at that stage as to whether or not you could trust Eilish? Could you trust her more than Thomas Mann? Not to have that be the kind of response, that maybe the response that her mother might have had in the previous book.
The problem now is, after that thing I read, is what do you do now? I mean, you can't have an Irishman shouting for a whole book. And you shouldn't even have them shout. So the problem now is to get her through the next hour, which is probably the next 10 pages. And I want her to do nothing. I want her to have all sorts of darting thoughts, ones that she doesn't trust herself. And, she could, I suppose, run over to her mother-in-law. They could both get involved, and they could beat Tony or kick his car when he came home. But that won't work. Kicking the car won't work. I can't think of anything for her to do. She can go upstairs. Oh, there's been a mention of cigarettes just before that. She can't puff away for the afternoon either. It's just too easy. It just seems wrong. I want something. And the only thing I can get is that she thinks of her, immediately you think of home. Suddenly she's home, meaning Ireland. She thinks when she was a kid, her older sister would know what to do now. But her older sister's dead. And her mother is still alive in Ireland, but her mother has no telephone. And so she goes eventually to the telephone itself and picks up the receiver. I've never seen anyone do this. And just holds the receiver, not dialing any number, just listening to whatever dial sound is there. And for a while. And that's as much as she can actually do, in that hour. And it's hard. You sort of know this because it's really hard to work out what someone should do when they're in a state of shock in a novel. Mm-hmm. Because the less they do, the better. But they have to do something. So, I'm just, the work there is constant erasure. And you don't write it, but you think of it and think, no, that won't work, this won't work. Should she go upstairs? Maybe, but not really. Should she make tea? No making tea. Irish novels, no making tea. We've had enough making tea. Or I've had enough making tea. I've made more tea in novels than I've ever made in my life. But therefore, you're very limited by what shock is and also what anger is, because anger is too easy. What if it was nothing? She just simply wandered in space. But you have to do something.
Oh, there's so much I want to ask you, and I'm looking at the time. I'm going to skip
my next
question.
No, sorry, I'm going on. I
will
go. I will be brief. I promise.
Do not be brief. But I'm going to skip ahead. I was going to ask you about the inner turmoil kind of driving Brooklyn and how her relationship to America has changed. But let's let readers discover that for themselves when they read it. There's this iconic scene that really wants the book to be turned into a film of the big Italian Sunday meal, and it gives us an insight into what Eilish's life has been like in this interstitial period between the books, how she's maneuvered herself to fit into the Fiorello family, the tiny little space maybe they've left for her. The extended family's whole lives have been shaped by the Sunday meal, believe it or not. There's a line, when they were drawing up the plans, Tony's mother had asked for a very large dining room. And there's some very kind of deft portraiture of also Italian America, gender norms and toxicities happening there. We were talking about internalized misogyny to do with Hillary Clinton earlier on, and you certainly see it with Tony's mother, and where the women aren't really invited into any conversations to do with politics when the Vietnam War comes up, and where Eilish partakes it's kind of unexpected conversations. She partakes in conversations that she feels obliged to, whether it's about clothes or the women's conversations, and it's very weird to read this in a more contemporary setting. So the problems in her marriage are all there in this description of the Sunday meal. It's a very kind of lively, feast-laden table, but the reality of it is so much less lively and very, very constricting. So just that Polaroid lens, how soon was that scene available to you? Had you been thinking about her life in the meantime between the books?
I mean, almost everything is from life or from home, and you sort of find ways of, every time you're looking for a detail, my mind is very lazy, so that first thing I go to is something I've seen or something I've been at. The big thing that happens to her in this particular period is she begins to read the New York Times on a Sunday. And she's never thought of this before. Her brother-in-law brings it first. Eventually, she gets her own one. So eventually, while this lunch is going on, she starts not to go to it and to go back in her own house. There are 4 houses the family owns in a sort of cul-de-sac, and just go through the paper reading the news. And my mother did that. It was a big moment in our house in 1960-something, 68 maybe. My mother began to buy the Irish Times, having moved from a much lesser newspaper that she was reading, to buy this newspaper, which was associated, it was a Protestant newspaper, and it was a brilliant newspaper, and it was a sort of a pioneering newspaper, especially in the 60s. And but the day that came into our house was a really important day, where a lot of things changed with the information, not just the information, but the sort of style, ways of thinking. So I just simply had it in my mind always as a thing that happened that would make an enormous difference to an intelligent woman living in a suburb, where a lot of the discussions going on in the paper were not available to her except in the paper. Mm-hmm. And the lunch, anyone who's ever had a partner who had a big family and have to sit through lunch with them all gabbling, whatever language they're talking in or whatever connections they have, you sit there like a ghost. And even if you've only done it once, it's unforgettable. So yeah, I mean, it's not hard to think of these things.
A big family is better than a small one. As an
is that worse? Is it?
Oh yes, it's worse. Eilish also holds something of herself in reserve. That was part of her character in Brooklyn, and it's still there. Certainly with her, even with her friends and with Tony's family. There's a couple of lines. She knows that she does this. There's a couple of lines I'm going to quote. One of her friends is saying of Tony, "He's a devoted husband," Lena said. "If I get half of that from Enzo, I'll be content." All of the young women who came on those Sundays saw the story of Eilish and Tony as a great romance. "I think you were destined to meet," Lena said, to a general agreement. "Even if he had not gone to that Irish dance and found you there, you would have met somewhere else. And getting married secretly. You must have been so happy." Another one of her friends says, "It makes me believe in love at first sight." It struck Eilish as strange how little they all knew about her, but she told them nothing. So we're told at one point that in all the years of Eilish's marriage with Tony, she's often dreamed about slipping away to some motel to spend 2 nights away in anonymity. That desire to have a relationship with oneself is key to her character. So you often seem to be writing about how a person maintains your selfhood through loss, and or how to kind of sidestep or skirt the station that you've been given by the world. And so Eilish is both unself-interested, but she's also spending both of these books trying to hold on to her agency, to her ethics, to her history and her well-being. And that seems to be the key tension. Is it possible to do both? And I guess when it comes to living as a writer, that's also the key question.
Oh, I don't think about... I mean, I was thinking about Jane Austen's Mansfield Park. You know, Fanny Price in that novel, how she makes her way through the novel without becoming self-conscious, without exerting herself in anyone's presence. But yet, she's watching in a sort of a way that's abiding and serious. And I suppose Washington Square would be another version of that, where Catherine Sloper in Henry James's novel has a way of... I suppose her feelings are very deep, but her presence in a room is not something that's noticed. And so I was sort of trying to work with that idea of a figure who's subdued, who's subdued in company, but who has a very deep personal presence in the world. So I was thinking about that, and that she's constantly aware of her ghost-like presence in various places.
She's not in denial.
What?
She's not in denial.
I don't think so, but she's not deeply self-conscious either. So she's never, I don't have to get big introspective passages going on because she just doesn't do that. Luckily for me, because I would find that difficult.
She also kind of sees herself partly as a mother, and motherhood is really central to the novel. It's a very positive portrait, I think, in some ways. And I'd love if you'd read from us. There was a little section between Eilish and her mother that I thought, I'll give you my copy because I've got the page turned on it.
It's 88, is it?
88.
This is her mother. She's back in Ireland, and they really are just at odds with each other about all matters. And so she's talking about, the real problem with her mother's house is it has not been decorated in 25 years, but the real problem for Eilish is she's been in America for 25 years, and the house looks really awful, and she realizes her kids are going to come, they're teenagers from America, and they're going to just recoil. So she says to her mother, one evening after the 9 o'clock news, she raised the matter of the mattress and the sheets, which she thought should be changed. The mattresses in the house. And what's wrong with it all? Her mother asked. Well, it might be nice to get some new mattresses and bedclothes. It might be nice for Rosella to sleep in a new bed in my room, and maybe we'll get for Larry and put it in the attic room. Why can't you sleep in one of the beds in Martin's room? Martin comes in and have your children asked for new beds? No, they've said nothing. So why don't we leave things as they are? Eilish did not reply. I notice, her mother went on, that people pamper their children nowadays. They want a new this and a new that. And often it's not actually the children who do the wanting, it's the parents. They don't spend enough time with their children because they are working and gallivanting, and then they compensate by buying luxuries that no one needs. And I heard someone talking about it on the radio. Eilish decided to change the subject as quickly as she could. You must be looking forward to your birthday. I don't think about it at all. I would like no fuss. Well, that's why everyone's coming, and they only the family. You must remember that old woman who used to live in number 47, her mother began. A look of satisfaction came over her mother's face. Miss Jane Hegarty, she was always called, her mother continued. She was very noble and kept a beautiful house. Miss Jane Hegarty was a very polite, well-spoken person. When she got older, a priest, a friend of the family's, used to visit once a week to give her the sacraments. And for a while a nurse came, but she took against the nurse. And then it was discovered that she was going to be 100 years old. And we all got invited to a party in her house. I went only because I believed she had invited me. How could I not go? But the people who organized the party were a low crowd. Not all of them, mind, but enough to make it into a free-for-all. Word spread that there was drink to be had. Louts descended on her house. And of course, they not only fed themselves lashings of vodka, if it wasn't gin, but they fed Miss Jane too, and in her innocence, Miss Jane drank it, topped up with lemonade. And they drank and she drank until someone put her to bed, and she died the next day. She died of the party. Vodka and good cheer one day, and a coffin and a hearse the next. And if anyone thinks this is happening on my birthday, they can think again. I will bar the door. It will be just for family, Eilish said. Families are often the worst.
It is a really positive relationship because they're not, they do speak. I know I won't give any spoilers about whether there are certain things they don't speak about, but they're not lying to one another on a deep level, I don't think. And it's true also of Eilish and her own children, that these two teenage children, they would make a person want to have children. It's the most positive. It seems to be the most positive thing in the life that we witness, it's not true of all of your books, I'm thinking of the Blackwater Lightship and the relationship with the mum in that. And there's a few other culpable ones. Were you trying to maybe compensate for...
No, you see, it's a generational thing where, she has her children, I suppose, in the 70s, in the late 60s, early 70s. Does she? Anyway, she has her children in that period when she's just completely delighted with them, and so is Tony, her husband. So it's very important that Tony, her husband, like as soon as the daughter is born, he just spends his evenings with the child or talking to the child. And so, yeah, it's a very easy relationship she has with her children, and that had to be there because I couldn't make. Yeah, oh, you're right. Sorry, I forgot. It is compensation. I couldn't go again at this business of mothers and their children going on at each other. I mean, I have the old woman doing it, but I couldn't bring it down again to the next generation, really just for reasons that it just would be too repetitious and too tedious to do it again. It doesn't mean I didn't want to do it again, but I had to restrain myself from trying. So you watch a sort of overcompensation as every time one of the children speaks, the parents smile, because otherwise, if they snarl, I'm finished, and the book is over.
And there's lots of, the book seems more dialogue heavy than some of your books. And is that intended to kind of break those awful silences, which is maybe a generational thing?
I wanted to give Eilish in this book as little introspection as possible, but I have to show her. And what she has done over the 25 years between the two books, between Brooklyn and this, is she has become sharper. Her mind is much sharper. And so in two scenes in the opening section where she has an argument with her mother-in-law, really trying to find out something. It's sort of forensic stuff. And this, even more with her brother-in-law. And what I'm trying to give her is the sharpest lines in that dialogue where she misses nothing. And she can come in each time. And it's not sort of textured with any sort of local flavor. It is her almost as a lawyer, arguing her own case, but really forensic. And so that those moments of dialogue were absolutely vital. But then when she gets to Ireland, it begins again, the half-said, the unsaid, and so her, it isn't as though throughout the book she's in a state of high articulacy. She's not. But when she speaks, I made sure this time around that she would have a different sort of tone, and I sort of enjoyed writing that for her, giving her that.
Yeah, with her children and with Tony's brother, Frank.
Yeah.
And also it's a polyphonic structure, the book, which also I don't think is something...
No, I've never done that before,
yeah.
no. A polyphonic, that in the whole first section, it's from her perspective. But it couldn't go on because when I get her to Ireland, she doesn't know things, and the reader has to know them. Now, there are two ways of doing that. One is the author comes in to say, unluckily for her, she didn't know the following. And I don't know how you do that. But the second one is where you just bring in another perspective. And you start showing, from using three different perspectives, how much each character doesn't know. There are so many things. The drama depends on people not knowing things. And therefore, I needed a second perspective. And I began to work with that. It's very difficult because if you give one character too much perspective, you lose the second character coming in. And so you have to be really careful not to unbalance the thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The exercises in style in this novel are so fascinating. In an interview in The Guardian, you described your coastal home in Enniscorthy as a subdued sort of magical. And when I read that, I thought, that's the right description for this book, and the prose and style of the book. And you also said, anytime I thought, that's a good sentence, out. And I think the results in this book, first of all, tonally, it's made of the same material as Brooklyn. And I found that fascinating that you were able to just dip right into that same material is the only way I can say it, a totally new outfit. So it's very, very smooth, almost uncannily smooth. And it relies on character as opposed to personality. It relies on events as opposed to dramatic climaxes. And so I'd love to hear how you approach the style, and if you would please tell us at least one or two sentences that you thought they were too good.
I don't mean too good as much as flowery, where you realize the author is starting to put in ornament, and that this is an effort to show something about the author. And I think self-suppression is the most vital thing here. That, I know I've said this before, I'm going to just say it one more time in my life, and I'll never say it again, that the page is not a mirror, it is blank, and Narcissus ended badly. And therefore, the idea is that I delivered the book in January of last year. So I had about a year with a finished book. And I would take it out every so often and just simply read it and try and read it in a day or a day and a half. And what I would do is just cut anything that struck me as flourish, unnecessary description, unnecessary response. I didn't cut dialogue. It wasn't the dialogue that mattered. It was the in-between things. If I thought I was trying to evoke, that you could suddenly go, she looked up at the sky, she saw the bergs of cloud, like what? Like nothing. Stop it immediately. Get that out of there. But towards the end, I do allow seabirds into the book. And I allow descriptions of the sand with the sand martins and the stream. And there's a scene on the beach. I do allow the last scene on the beach to have some of it. But up to then, zero tolerance for writerly stuff. Writers, just get on with it.
So yeah, the similes and metaphors really aren't there.
Oh no, I mean similes. God.
I'm very guilty, I'm afraid. I'm just looking at the time. We've got 4 minutes before I've got to turn to audience questions. So if you have something written, make sure you pass along your cards to one of the people walking around. You've just finished up teaching at Columbia, and I was wondering, were you teaching when you were writing Long Island, and what were you teaching? And did those books influence the book in any way?
Oh, absolutely influenced them. When I was early on in the book, I was teaching a course. I'm the last clunky, professor left who does this. It's a course called Henry James. No one else, it's over, that sort of thing. And it was a graduate seminar, and it ended with the Golden Bowl. And we would have spent about 5 weeks on the Golden Bowl. And the Golden Bowl is a great novel of just 4 characters and secrecy and who knows what. When Maggie Verver finds out, Charlotte Stant doesn't know she's found out. So Maggie has this power over her. I know about you, but you don't know that I know about you. And I was, sometimes in the seminars, there would be on a Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock, and it was the end, it was just the ending pandemic. So the students everybody was spread out. I would realize something I could do with my own book in the middle of trying to pretend that I was talking about the Golden Bowl. And I would, and it wouldn't be that I would rush home to write it. I'd actually let it stay and worked with it and sifted it and distilled it. And also Joseph Conrad's novel Victory, one of the novels which, he gets away with telling every part of the story twice. And it's one of the great books. It's a huge, and again, I was working with that probably a year before. And also Edith Wharton, The Age of Innocence. So there were a large number. I find that teaching is really, I'm just teaching myself. And I know the students are sort of vaguely listening, and I'm grateful to them. But it is for me, absolutely, it's made a huge difference. I'm in an English department rather than a creative writing department. And that for me has just really changed things. First of all, I just love it. But secondly, for this book, it gave me, some sort of energy of just seeing how seeing could be. I didn't obviously use Henry James's long sentences or Conrad's sort of strange adjectival, misdirections, but I did get ideas of how many gaps to leave, how much silence to leave, whether you can actually tell the same story twice. The answer is sometimes. Conrad can do it all the time. And in this book, I tried it, I think, twice.
I imagine that for this book you didn't have to do any comparable research to, the Thomas Mann novel or the Henry James novel. But had you any relationship with this library during the course of writing the book, or just in general historically? You can speak about it if there wasn't anything in particular with this book.
But I suppose you mean coming to the public library? Yeah, well, I suppose I came on the Cullman, which is the most marvelous thing, for a year in 2000. Was it? Yeah, and it was just, it was an extraordinary time. I wrote, let me see, I know, I had written the first part of The Master, and I realized what I needed to do for a year, basically, was, among other things, just listen to Americans talking. And of course, there were 15 of us, and there was one German and me, and 13 Americans. And so I didn't use anything, but I just listened. I found that since I was writing the Henry James book, I should at least know something about how Americans sound when they speak. So that was very useful.
And with Long Island, had you spent much time there? Thank you. The
No,
thing is, it's closer to Ireland on the map.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I would do is I would get the train out and just random stops, just get off and walk around to see what I could see, which was generally nothing much. I was also the only person walking a lot of the time. So to be very, very careful, because people must have thought, who is that man or why? You know, he should be arrested. And everyone else was driving. And but one day I just took a turn and I found a cul-de-sac in Lindenhurst. I saw the 4 houses and I thought, here I am, I have it now. And I got the train back in. And
I love how insulting that could potentially be to Long Islanders.
Oh no! I mean, you know, I just needed something for my novel. I went and got it. Henry James had an absolutely marvelous story about a colleague of his who wrote a famous novel about French Protestant youth, and someone said to her, "How much you must know about French Protestant youth? How did you get," he said, being English, "how did you know so much?" And she said, "Oh, you see, once I was walking down a stairwell in Paris, and I looked in the doorway, and I saw some people I thought might be French Protestant youth. And I just stopped for a moment and just looked at them. And so that's really, you know, I got so much from that little moment that I didn't ever need anything more. So I'm the same."
We have a question connected a little bit. How do you choose your titles? Did the title come first? I can imagine that it might have.
With Brooklyn and Long Island, you're dealing with the irony of title, where she doesn't experience Brooklyn. She's basically in a room in a boarding house. All the things that are there for her in Brooklyn, just because she's her first generation, she's her first few years arriving. In this book, in Long Island, her children will know Long Island in all sorts of ways she never will and never could. For example, they will go to their first parties, they will go on dates, but she's always an outsider. These places are places of the names of the places are more important for her. You know, she puts them on envelopes. That's where she lives, but it's not as though she's partaking in any sense of community or society, because that first generation, we all know this from Ireland, that someone could come to Wexford from Poland and not know what Wexford meant. You know, and I'm not even sure what it means other than you experience it over many years and you sort of know something. It's very hard to move and know something. And so it's all about not knowing these places as much as it is fully inhabiting them. Yeah. So the titles are there for that reason.
Mm-hmm. This is connected, I think, to what you were just speaking to. When Ailish's mother shows Rosella all of the photos Ailish sent and perceptively notes the disappearing subjects, i.e. Tony and his family, she proclaims, "I watched you all grow up." As a FaceTime aunt, watching the kids grow up in Ireland, this struck me as the quintessential emigrant experience. Did you draw on personal experience for this scene, and how do you see emigration changing? Gurmila Mahagat Orla.
Some of that's is also from life. I mean, that when I lived in Spain, I was 20 and I would write home every week. And the letters had to be very clean because they would be read by everyone in the family, including an aunt that I loved, and I didn't want her to think I was up to anything strange in Spain. And so, but I wrote a descriptive letter every week, quite a long letter in handwriting, and I probably wrote maybe 100 letters or maybe more over that period, maybe 3 or 4 years. And I never thought about them until, well, eventually I found them. You know, I mean, they were in the old house, and that strange idea of my mother would have kept them. Never knew that. It just never occurred to me. So I was thinking about that idea of being away, and you know, what happens in the novel is she sends photographs home, really, every 2 weeks, but she never gets any response. She never knows her mother says nothing about them. But eventually when she comes home, when her daughter comes, suddenly there they all are, they're dated, they're in order, and they're in boxes, and it's just the strangest idea that her mother has been poring over this material without ever letting her know. And I think that anyone, again, who's been away from home like that, not knowing how much on the other side people miss you and think about you, or maybe not, maybe they don't, but any clue of that often comes as a sort of shock.
Mm-hmm. So a couple of people have asked questions to do with immigration. Someone's asked, is our heroine's adaptation to Long Island as difficult as it was to Brooklyn? To me, it seems that Brooklyn was a lot easier in the fact that it seemed so different to Ireland. It was exotic, whereas in Long Island, in the end, she's in a kind of almost a curtain twitching setup.
Yeah, but I mean, she gets the sudden attack of homesickness she gets in Brooklyn comes from nowhere. She doesn't know what it's called. And she just feels this astonishing. I mean, she's very even-tempered, and she suddenly gets this extraordinary sadness, which moves into a kind of panic. And she doesn't get that again. And anyone who's been through that knows that if it doesn't come a second time, that's great. You know.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I've lived all over the place, and you have as well, but you maintain a very strong connection to Ireland, and you're back there every year and live there part of the time. Someone has asked, how do you feel about Ireland today? But obviously you like going back. You know,
yeah, it's
you don't
really,
put on a hat and glasses.
Yeah, I mean, middle age, I was going to say middle age, but old age is really strange. Because I went through a period where, well, you certainly did, where we really hated the politicians, the people who ran Ireland. They were loathsome. And now, you know, Leo Varadkar has just been Taoiseach. You know, he was, well, it wasn't just that he was gay. He spoke in a way that I really approved of. I didn't approve of his politics necessarily, but I liked him personally. I like Micheál Martin, who's the Minister for Foreign Affairs and the Deputy Prime Minister, and I like Simon Harris, and I like Michael D. Higgins, who's the President. I mean, I like them. Now, what does that say about me over time? And so I feel very comfortable in Ireland, and it's not, I mean, the referendum on gay marriage was a really extraordinary event because the campaign itself was so beautifully handled. In other words, the people who were against us as gay people, they had to go silent because they knew that if they called us names, people wouldn't like that. And the campaign was family-led. In other words, you got advice from those running the campaign. I was in Ireland for a lot of it. Don't speak. Let your sister speak, your mother speak, your granny. Do you have a granny? No, I don't. But let someone else in your family speak for you. And it's often a door-to-door campaign. Bring someone from your family to say, this is my gay brother, and I would like him to be as happy as we are, and he wants to get married, and could you just lend us your vote for this? And people began to think about this. I wrote some speeches for one of the politicians, which was great fun. Just the big problem was how to get men to change their minds. Middle-aged men often don't change their minds. How to get this to happen. And the issue was, don't argue ever. Just don't argue. Just simply tell your story. And if your story isn't working, tell someone else's story. So imagine if your daughter told you she was lesbian and she was crying and she said, there'll never be a place for me in Ireland, there'll never be a place for me in this family, I'm going to be nobody now. And you were her father and you were awake all night. Was there something you could say to her in the morning? And, working on that sort of level with people about changing their minds for the vote. And that certainly showed us a way into, I suppose, in a country that's generally conservative, to see if you could get people for once just to come over to your side. And it was tremendously interesting because just before the campaign, it was the Minister for Health, and he was obviously going to be Prime Minister. He came on the radio, Leo Varadkar, and he said, he was talking about himself. It was sort of one of those personality interviews. And halfway through, he suddenly said, well, as a gay man, as a what? Leo, gay. And the presenter said, what did you just say? He said, well, as a gay man, I often have, and he came out that day on the radio. Suddenly, a politician from the other party came out also, and then a famous television journalist came out, and everyone was coming out, and I suddenly thought, is the Archbishop of Dublin going to come out? Are they all going to come out, one by one? Who knew was going to be the name of every day was going to be Who Knew? And that was a very exciting and funny time, I have to say, in Ireland. So yeah, I felt completely at home, and I felt loved and wanted. It didn't quite last, but it's lasted pretty much. And there was a beautiful moment where I was watching the 6 o'clock news on the day of the count of the votes. And there's a person in Ireland called Panty Bliss, or Miss Panty, and she's absolutely tremendous. and she dresses up, scrubs up very beautifully with a big wig, and you know she's like I suppose the most intelligent person and the most beautiful person in Ireland. And the 6 o'clock news on main Irish television had as their main item, Miss Panty arrives at Dublin Castle, because of course she was the leader in some way of all this movement, and she was Dublin Castle where the count was going on, as though this was she was the representative of the majority. And that was a good moment.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. And you're obviously someone who also reads contemporary Irish literature, which is not a given for elderly gentlemen. Or for any men at all. But someone has asked, do you read and speak Irish?
No. Do you?
No, I did when I was a teen.
I know.
Used to be an extra on Russ Naroon on the Irish language channel.
Oh God, that's very impressive.
But I didn't ever really have lines until I once had a line, and then I didn't get invited back. Yeah. And someone has asked, do you write every day, and how many drafts do you write?
Oh, I write in longhand if I'm writing a novel or a story. And then I leave the left-hand page blank so I can make corrections. And I tend, if I think something is not going to work, not to write it. So in other words, it isn't as though I'm discovering as I'm writing. I'm discovering as I'm thinking. And I'm discovering as I'm lying around, and I'm discovering as I'm playing tennis or something. And then I sort of know what it is I need to do or what might work here. Later on, it becomes a process of cutting and adding, but not much adding, but quite a bit of cutting. And the main thing is to get a year or two where you're thinking, where you're working things out, and you wait until you get a rhythm. And when the rhythm comes, it could be just an ordinary sentence, and you write it down. But with that, the effort, I suppose, is that you might feel, or you best feel, you might never get another chance to write this, so you should write it properly now. Of course, it doesn't always work, but it's a good way of just saying, in other words, you don't just say, I'm writing a draft, I'll make it perfect later. There'll be something lazy in the rhythms of that first draft if you do that you really have to write as though this will be it, that it won't be another chance with this, as though paper is scarce.
I can imagine how the opening pages might have been exactly as they were when you first wrote them.
More or less.
I have to come back now to that last bumble of mine. First of all, you're not an elderly man, so I take that back.
I am. Hold on, I am.
You are not. No,
I'm going to be 69 at the end of this month. I mean, 69 is old.
No, it's not. Maybe it's just looking at your bibliography. You should be elderly, but you're not. I am. But the other thing is being Fiction Laureate of Ireland is a really, really big job. It involves not only kind of doing a book club almost every month or every other month, and live at various libraries throughout the island, but also writing blog posts, which eventually turn into a book. But it's not just that you're reading contemporary Irish writing because of this role. You know, you have been blurbing books and everything through the years. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it's very much a reaching down and bringing other writers up, which is not to be sniffed at. So thank you for what you're doing. I'll just ask one more question. Thinking about your fiction, the main influences that tend to be pinned on you are Austen, James, Flaubert, and Lawrence. But there are some contemporary examples, I think, that you've brought up in interviews that people have started to weave in, like Louise Gluck, James Baldwin, Hemingway, and Elizabeth Bishop. I was wondering, do you think that a writer's deepest influence comes from what they read before, say, the age of 30, or whether you can continue to be influenced on that deep level of what it is to write a novel, what it is to have a scene?
Yeah, I think the books that matter remain the books you read when you were about 18 or 19 and you were taken over by something. I mean, I've written this book on James Baldwin that's coming out, and really reading Go Tell It on the Mountain, I bought it myself, and I didn't really know what it was when I was 18 or 19. That book and the way that Baldwin dealt with religion and the way he dealt with sexuality and the way he dealt with boyhood, it opened a lot of possibilities for me, much more than Portrait of the Artist did. By James Joyce. The Baldwin book, I don't know why that should be, but every so often along the way you find something that enables you. And I found a novel like Charming Billy by Alice McDermott, which is set in Irish America. I found that book really interesting. I was seeing ways she could handle, for example, grief, for example, family, for example, a single household, a connection to Ireland that was tenuous but there. So there were books like that that along the way, including, well, I read Elizabeth Bishop. For some reason, she was really well published on our side of the water. And I read those poems when I was 19. And so really these books on Bishop and Baldwin are just ways of trying to deal with an overwhelming experience when I was 18 or 19 with poems and novels that I couldn't register then. I couldn't work them out as to where the emotion was coming from. And so, it's taken me all these years to work some of that out, really. Yeah.
Wow. Well, we're very grateful that you're doing it, and that you are even have returned to poetry. I believe you started out with poetry. You've gone back there, and while there's no kind of metaphors and similes in this book, you've got somewhere to put those. I enjoy reading both. So I just want to thank you all for turning out tonight and encourage you all to read the book. I think that it really behooves you to read Brooklyn first, so buy both. It can be read alone, but you're going to feel all the more, I think, for knowing the backstory of these characters. It's been an honor to chat with you. Thank you so much, Colm.
Thank you very much for doing it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.